The Second Amendment was written to remind whatever government was in place that the people have the right, not the privilege, to keep and bear arms. The type of arms was not specified, leaving it open to whatever arms the people cared to bear. The reason the right of the people to keep and bear arms was strongly recognized and even written down as an amendment to the Constitution is because our founders knew that if the government were able to regulate civilian firearms, they would abuse that power and the people would quickly be disarmed. Now, the people have always had arms at least the equivalent of the military. From all the way back to our founding when flintlock rifles were used and cannons were privately owned, to the early 1800s when percussion cap rifles were created, and on up to modern day firearm technology. It's interesting how the gun grabbers expect modern day gun owners to be restricted or limited to owning the same firearms that were in circulation at the time of our founding, 250 years ago. But when it comes to gun laws, they like to make them up as they go. In other words, they'll create modern day gun laws to suit their often political needs under hypothetical situations when it comes to things like bump stocks, pistol braces, magazine capacity, special licenses, background checks, and so on, but expect you to be limited to a musket. Why? Because they know it will make you defenseless against a government that might decide to rule like King George III did back in the 1700s. They need to track and confiscate firearms through gun registries and red flag laws, which they've been putting in place for decades. And you, having capable firearms in your possession, throws a wrench in their dreams of tyranny. Civilian firearms have evolved from single-shot muzzle-loading rifles to semi-automatic and automatic guns, keeping in lockstep with military weaponry, and for good reason. The Second Amendment was written to keep the power in the hands of the people. But the gun grabbers wonder why you need a semi-automatic rifle to hunt deer, implying that the only reason you should have a firearm is to hunt deer. Their arguments are very cleverly designed to put you in a defensive position and force you to argue for the privilege of using guns to hunt, further exploiting the Second Amendment and destroying its intent, while pretending that gun ownership should be by a need-only basis. If you argue hard enough to justify your need to use a semi-automatic rifle or any other type of gun for hunting, which is what they want you to do, you might just get your wish. But they'll make sure that your semi-automatic rifle is highly regulated, registered with the government, and only allowed for deer hunting. So be careful what you're arguing for. Isn't it interesting how the gun grabbers want your guns to be limited to 18th century technology, but not your gun laws? They would love for you to be limited to a muzzle-loading flintlock rifle, but restricted to modern-day red flag laws, gun-free zones, and in-home mandatory storage regulations, just to name a few. In his opinion on the Bruen case, Justice Clarence Thomas wrote, "When the Second Amendment's plain text covers an individual's conduct, the Constitution presumptively protects that conduct. The government must then justify its regulation by demonstrating that it is consistent with the nation's historical tradition of firearm regulation." Now, Thomas said firearm regulations must meet historical tradition. He didn't say firearms must meet historical tradition because he understood the reason we have them. In fact, the whole idea of the Second Amendment implies the ability to protect against government tyranny, which would call for a comparable method of defense to that of the government. At Gun Owners of America, we are arguing for the Second Amendment in its purest form. We're in no compromise, which means that we will never support gun laws, restrictions, registries, or regulations that violate or infringe upon your right to keep and bear whatever arms you choose and for whatever purpose you choose to bear them. Our founding fathers saw these gun grabbers coming over 200 years away, and that's why they wrote the Second Amendment. They dealt with them once, and they gave us the written documents as part of our country's doctrine so we would have the ability to shut them down when they showed up again. Well, they're here again, and we will not compromise, but we do need your support. So become a member at gunowners.org. Thanks for watching Bullet Points. I'm Dan Wass for Gun Owners Foundation. You can find more Second Amendment content and updates at gunowners.com.